I think the biggest challenges in tech and cyber risk that customers are facing is that they actually don't know the biggest problems that they're facing. They don't know what's actually keeping them up at night at the moment because they don't have the insight and the answers that they need. Excel spreadsheets will only do so much for so long for you, and it's difficult to get a single answer of am I resilient or am I safe or what's going to hit me next and what am I going to do about it. NewRocket's approach is we really want to help you solve your business problem. We don't want to focus merely on how do you implement it in ServiceNow. We want to be able to understand your business. What are you facing right now? What are your priorities? What are your stakeholders' priorities? And what are your executive priorities? So what we do is we assign practitioners to every single one of our engagements, and we tie the practitioner expertise with ServiceNow knowledge to truly get you the full solution. One of the biggest things I recommend for customers on how to implement cyber risk is to be able to take a look and take a step back and say, okay, what's the first step I can take? And what is the North Star that I'm trying to reach? And you go through that journey one step at a time. I talk a lot about dream big or think big, but small steps. And that's really the only way you're going to be able to accomplish your goals. I think one of the biggest mistakes when you're trying to implement cyber risk is focusing purely on features and functions of the platform. What you really want to do is focus on the outcomes you want to accomplish and then work with your partner on what is the right way to accomplish that. The way that we look at it is we really want to know the why of what you're asking. A lot of organizations will come to us and say, hey, I want these features. Like let's say I want a blue button. No one actually wants the blue button. They want what the button can do. And if you tell us what you want to accomplish, we'll actually tell you the best way to do it in ServiceNow. One of the things that I find is that if you focus on features and functions, you're basically looking at every blade of grass. You're trying to fix the blades of grass. You're trying to groom the grass. I take metaphors far too far, which is just fine. But then once you look up, you suddenly realize, yeah, you've got a great set of features and functions, but you haven't actually accomplished what you want to do, which is why we focus so hard on the journey and why we focus so hard on the North Star. So I see success of a cyber risk program in a couple of phases. The first thing you want to be able to do, like the ultimate goal most organizations are trying to accomplish, is they're trying to understand their risk in real time. And there's a couple of phases to accomplishing being able to understand your risk in real time. First thing you get an understanding of is you get an understanding of your actual risk posture in this moment. You get better insight into your risk posture. You're able to say, okay, now I have some answers. I know what should be keeping me up at night. And then the next phase of it is once you have an understanding of your risk posture, then you're going to be able to start to see your risks decrease. And you're going to be able to see an improvement on your top 10 risks. So when you're thinking about how do you know if your program is successful or not, the first question you need to ask is, am I getting better insights so that I can make better business decisions so I can work towards decreasing my risk? That's the first phase. And then the second phase would be, okay, now am I able to actually take action and make better business decisions to decrease my risk? So have I changed how I'm deploying my assets? Have I changed how I'm handling my vulnerability program? Am I closing issues faster? Are controls failing less or are controls being fixed more quickly? Is the number of failed controls decreasing? Do I have my key controls or am I now have 100% coverage? Those are the types of questions that I think will help you understand if your program is successful or not. The parameters of a successful cyber risk customer are fairly straightforward. It's ultimately the ability to take a long-term look at how are you going to be going through this journey with your partners as well as with your risk and your business partners. Organizations that are successful will define a North Star and are willing to work through those items. They define what is most critical for them first, usually crown jewels that are most important to be protected, and they work through solving those problems first and then iterating and continuing to grow the risk program over time. Operational resilience is something that's really, really near and dear to my heart. I think resilience is a critical function of risk, security, and business continuity programs. In fact, I think that anytime a customer comes to us and says, I have a cyber risk problem or an operational risk problem or a security operations problem, what they're ultimately saying is they want to become more resilient. And I think it's important to really think about how do you become resilient as the outcome of all of these programs. ServiceNow is really well placed to do that because you have the opportunity to integrate data together. And the integration of data is how organizations are going to become more resilient. There isn't truly a single answer to am I safe or am I resilient? But if you start to get the data connected together so that you're able to say, okay, I have my security operations data here. It's giving me information on my attack surface and the exposures there. I have my compliance program here. It's giving me the information on the exposures I have and the non-compliances I have. I have my risk program here telling me what's most important to me. That's ultimately what's going to bringing all of that data together is how you become resilient. So layering the operational resilience use case on top is a really great way of bringing that all together and helping organizations be more successful. So at NewRocket, we have a very specific and defined approach to how do you handle resilience and how do you become more resilient. It is about building your foundation and then 4 pillars towards being resilient. The first thing you need to do is you need to know what your assets are and you need to know how important they are to you. That's understanding what services your assets are providing, the applications that sit on them, the server components, etc. Then you need to actually know what are the risks that could be associated to those assets and how are you going to handle them and where are you going to respond. So having a risk-based or a threat-based risk assessment against those assets and then creating a solid policy program, usually informed by the regulatory standards that you're under, to be able to define what are the rules that you want your asset owners to follow. It's really important, and I think this is something that's sometimes missed in compliance programs. Make sure your asset owners know what's going to happen to you or what's going to happen to you if they don't follow the rules. Also making sure they actually know what rules are expected of them before they're found in failure. The next thing is performing the assessments and regularly checking that your rules and the requirements and your controls are in place and having a regular process to be able to make sure you've implemented that. The thing that's also associated to that is usually when you have a good set of rules, a vulnerability response program as well as a configuration compliance program is part of that. Being able to make sure and monitoring the success of both of those programs to be able to help make sure that you have you've secured your attack surface as best you can. The next step is making sure you've identified all the things that could go wrong. What are your worst case scenarios? What are the potential failures that could be impacting your assets? And making sure you have a plan to correct them. That includes identifying your non-cybersecurity events as well as your cybersecurity events that could affect you and making sure you have a plan for operational recovery. The next pillar would be to make sure that once you've actually identified all the things that could go wrong, when the inevitable happens and something does go wrong, enacting your recovery as quickly as possible with a prioritization of operational recovery. Sometimes when we talk about resilience in IT and assets and cybersecurity, we focus a lot on simply responding to what's gone wrong, the data breach, etc. It's really important that as you're handling the data breach, you're also bringing the assets back up so your services to your customers can continue and your business can continue unaffected. Finally, last but not least, your third parties need to be held accountable to the same rules and standards that you have. And that means that just because you've outsourced the services or you've outsourced an activity, you haven't outsourced the risk. So having a good third-party risk management program brings it all together to make sure that you're covered on all aspects of your business. I think that the biggest operational disruption most customers are worried about is actually that unknown operational disruption. I find that the worst impact and the hardest thing to handle is a thing you haven't expected. So ultimately, most customers are worried about the unknown, which is really normal and natural and a very human reaction. The advice that I have for customers that kind of say, hey, I don't know what's going to hit me next, I'm not sure, is really making sure you have a series of recovery options that don't necessarily get so specific that it's adverse event specific. Like you don't want to have a recovery plan for you've had a hurricane or a recovery plan if you've had an earthquake, like different recovery plans for different outages, but more thinking about what kind of overall impact would these types of outages have and how do I respond to that impact? So an adverse weather event or a series of adverse weather events could make your data center unavailable. So make sure you have a recovery plan for your data centers. Having power outages or having a threat actor could make specific servers unavailable. So make sure you have recovery plans for those specific servers. Ultimately, the idea is trying to make recovery plans that are flexible enough to respond to just about any type of negative impact and being able to test those so they can work like clockwork. I think organizational culture is actually one of the most important things about operational resilience because ultimately, even though a lot of the time when we talk about resilience or when we talk about cyber risk, we're actually talking about assets and technology and attack surfaces, it's the people. who use them, and it's the processes that they perform that actually are the reason that those assets exist in the first place. So making sure you have an organizational culture that is aware of how to help make their organization more resilient in even the small ways as well as in the large ways, as well as the importance of activities that may seem unnecessary, like doing a recovery test or making sure that you bring your laptop home every night, making sure that they understand the importance of those and the negative outcome that could happen. I think that this is also really important, even just talking about risk and security, is having organizational culture put in place. And this is ultimately because people are the biggest risk to any organization. They are 63% of data breaches are the result of a human intervention and a human acting in an insecure way. And 93% of those people who act in insecure ways know that they're doing the wrong thing, but they're ultimately acting to achieve their business objectives. So making sure you have an organizational culture that prioritizes your resilience, prioritizes your risk and compliance and your security is how you ultimately make yourself more resilient in the long term. So I think that technology plays a huge role in operational resilience. Operations doesn't exist without technology, and technology has no reason to exist without supporting operations. So making sure that you have a good digital resilience program to inform your operational resilience program is ultimately a critical part of how you make sure that everything works together. Which is why when I talk about how to be resilient, and in a previous question when I answered it, I mentioned the first thing you need to do is you need to know what's important to your business and what assets are supporting it. I think that the biggest differentiator for NewRocket in the market versus other partners is that we bake resilience into everything we do. We ultimately see resilience as the outcome of risk, security, compliance, audit, and all of the activities. And we do every time talk to our customers about that outcome they're looking to achieve. So we really have a resilient mindset applied to everything that we do in security and risk. One of the most common challenges I'm hearing from our customers about AI governance ultimately is they aren't sure how to start. They know that they need to have a governance program, but there hasn't been a lot of examples in the market and the industry on actually how to set up a good AI governance program. And there's very few regulatory standards so far. There's now like the EU Ethical AI Act, which is now going into force. And then the NIST has also released a risk management framework, so the AI RMF. And those are starting to provide some standards, but those are still very new. And so a lot of it right now, when organizations are thinking about AI governance, they're getting lost in the theoretical and they're getting lost in how to start. And so ultimately what NewRocket does is when we're working with our customers to solve these problems is we try and start it the way we start everything else. We need to make sure we've defined what the North Star is and then work out the journey that they need to accomplish to get there. And it really is about starting small and identifying what is the first thing we can do to help define your AI governance. We've identified that it's actually the most important thing is to understand whether or not the organization is AI ready. So making sure that the organization is informed on all of the aspects of AI, and then working out the activities that are necessary to become AI ready. And the activities to become AI ready will include things such as making sure you have a strategy on how to have information sharing between your data. Because AI, it's incredibly important to have your data shared together and having it integrated. Another aspect is making sure that organizations understand the different aspects of AI. A lot of the time we're talking about Gen AI because it is the new great thing and it is have a lot of opportunity to change our business. But AI is much more than that. And organizations are probably using AI today that they're not even aware of that. So making sure they get informed on these activities really helps start to set that baseline. Once we've put the strategy together and the organization is putting the strategy into force, what NewRocket will do is then help the organization perform a AI empowerment activity. And that's actually when they start to get into using AI for automation activities within ServiceNow and then be able to start to use it in specific candidates for automation. And ultimately what we're trying to do is we're trying to help them get to be more AI powered. And that's when you're in the agentic AI situation, you've got your AI agents working with you, you're really starting to enhance the value of every employee because Gen AI is going to be able to make things easier and faster, making everybody more productive, as well as making sure that organizations have put together the right framework to be able to do so responsibly and be able to innovate with confidence. So as you're going through the maturity journey to become AI powered, it's very important that you actually thread your AI governance strategy throughout. So you really want to make sure that you're creating the rules and responsibilities, or the roles and responsibilities for the different aspects of AI, so that again, you're able to do so with responsibly and with confidence. The AI governance strategy includes making sure that you're identifying the opportunities to start to use AI, identifying the risks that could impact that opportunity, and then putting in the controls and compliance as necessary to protect the opportunity and to make sure that you're enabling the business to move quickly but responsibly as they're trying out new things. We do want to give organizations the opportunity to fail. And we want to not fail in the grand scheme of things, of course, but to actually try things out and realize, oh, that hasn't worked. What we ultimately want to do is just make sure that you fail in a place that's safe, and that you're actually able to go to market with confidence, knowing you've done everything you could to make this as successful as possible. And that's ultimately what AI governance is making sure that organizations can try new things with responsibility, as well as making sure that they're able to be confident they've done everything they can to make this successful. When I think about statistics associated to return on investment with Gen AI, I actually think about the opportunity for Gen AI versus the actual return on investment we're seeing today. Gen AI is still very new, and we are still working into broadening the use of it. And I think that it's more important for organizations to understand the opportunity they have if they were to invest into Gen AI. So there's $7.9 trillion available to be of additional value per worker available globally as a result of using Gen AI. So what that means is by making individuals more productive and being able to make them more enabled through the power of Gen AI, organizations are going to be able to get higher value out of the individuals. It's going to increase productivity astronomically. So organizations have that part of that 7.9 trillion to be able to go after, depending on how aggressive they want to be or the approach that they want to take to do so. The other thing I would add is that in the importance of the AI governance stat, 50% is the actual increase of value that organizations will get out of their Gen AI program if they implement AI governance. So that's including the increase of adoption, the success in achieving their business outcomes. All of those activities are enhanced by including a governance program alongside your Gen AI program. So I think the ethical considerations for organizations that want to implement AI are definitely an important consideration for organizations to take. I think that's really well tied with implementing an AI governance program. Organizations now are grappling with questions like, should AI truly replace a human being? Or what are the ethical considerations or the impact of implementing a large language model that might have bias in the market? So all of these activities can expose the organization to risk, both from a reputational perspective, a monetary perspective, as well as a regulatory perspective, depending on the industry. And this is, again, really where implementing AI governance is ultimately the most important part of your AI program, because the only way that you can be ethical about implementing AI is for you to do it with consideration and looking at all of the possibilities that could impact you. So creating a program that considers, what is the bias that I could be introducing if I implement this AI model? What are the impacts to my employees if I implement this AI model? What are the impacts to my customers if I implement this AI model? What will I be perceived as I do these things? Like, we want to make sure that everybody's acting as good corporate citizens of the world as they're implementing AI. And that requires that you take a careful look at whether or not your strategy and your implementation aligns with the organization's values and what they want to accomplish. So I think one of the most challenging regulatory or compliance issues for organizations that want to implement AI is privacy. So making sure that your data is handled responsibly, it's anonymized appropriately, and that organizations are able to consider the impact of that data to their customers or to their employees is critical. So making sure that you are applying the appropriate privacy laws as you're implementing your AI strategy and as part of your AI governance strategy is critical. And this would include making sure you have consent as you're using data, making sure that the data is only used for the appropriate purposes. You're not keeping personally identifiable information unless it's absolutely necessary. And you're only doing so with the appropriate consents and within the laws of the region that you're in. I think most organizations that are being aggressive or are being innovative with implementing AI, that they're going to have the earliest opportunity to go after that $7.9 trillion of value that you could get. So they're going to have the opportunity to, first of all, to find out what works quickly and get further along in what works than their competitors. And it's really important that you're doing so using governance and keeping that in mind, because the way that you guarantee success is by using a governance program. The governance program is designed to help enable you to be innovative and making sure that you're able to consider all of the potential outcomes before you take that first innovative step. The performance indicators of an AI program will be varied based upon the different use cases that you might be implementing as part of your AI program. But things that you could be looking at would be the increased productivity of individuals, or the increased ability to create output of a department, being able to do things more quickly and doing things more accurately would all be opportunities to identify the success of the program. Another thing might be the further engagement of your employees or of your customers. So for example, as we're talking about AI agents being able to help both internal and external customers, you would be able to have people who are more willing to interact with processes they might not have been willing to interact with before, because you've got the agent that's smoothing the way and making things easier for them to accomplish what they were finding very difficult to accomplish before.